Strappy plants like lomandras, dianellas, kangaroo paws, and agapanthus need to be respected. You can't just prune them any old way you'd please. This is a crime against horticulture. Now, there are a few different ways to prune strappy plants, and it's going to depend on your personal taste. It's going to depend on what you need from the space and what you want to get out of the plant. Let's have a chat about this. So one of the things that most people say about strappy plants is that they become overgrown, or maybe they're obstructing a footpath. Now, there are a few different things to do about this. Yes, you can hedge them into a dome if you really want to. Particularly stuff like lomandras and dianellas. They look fine. Some people really like that neat and tidy look. But I think that for me personally, and I don't know about you, but I really like to let them express that natural strappy shape that they have. So for me, if a plant is overgrown and it's growing onto a footpath, there's probably two things that have happened. One is that you put the wrong plant in the wrong place. So a lot of the time what I'll say is just dig it out, put something smaller there. Just pick a plant that really suits that space. However, if you have planted the right plant and it used to look good and now it's become really overgrown, what you can do is get into the rhizomes, which are the little stems that sort of are just above the soil, or sometimes with particular plants they can be under the soil. And you want to dig out some of those rhizomes. So don't worry, this is really just the same thing as pruning the stems off of a shrub. It's the same biological thing. So make sure you've got a nice sharp shovel, dig it into the ground, remove some of that material, and you can propagate them somewhere else in the garden. Just remember that plants that have plant breeders' rights, or PBR, you need to have permission in order to sell them. So don't go and sell your plant unless you know what you're doing, because there's actually quite a sophisticated copywriting system there. Without these plant breeders' rights, we wouldn't have some of the best bred plants. Because you see, it actually takes a long time to breed plants, and without a plant breeders' rights system, there would be no incentive for people to breed new pest-resistant varieties or variegated varieties. We just have the same old boring plants that have always existed through evolution. Maybe you really do want that strappy plant to be neat and tidy, in which case, fine, go for it. It's not my taste, but maybe you want to prune it into a dome or a ball. There's no crime against this. I just think that sometimes it is a crime against horticulture, and maybe you should be locked up. It's also going to mean that you're going to have to consistently prune them, and that's just adding extra work to your workload. Who really wants to be pruning when you don't need to? You will find that over time, when you consistently do this for a few years, that the foliage will start to die. You'll have the grey or brown leaves at the base, and then maybe a few green leaves at the top. This has a few consequences for the plant's health. It restricts airflow, and so that encourages fungal issues, and you'll also find aphids starting to take hold, or mealybugs. So whether or not you're actually pruning into a dome, I still do recommend removing some of those dead leaves. Now, whether it's a lomandra, or it's a dianella, or it's an agapanthus, removing those dead leaves is going to make the plant look a lot fresher and a lot nicer, and I just think that that's a nicer look. And that is actually respecting the plant's habit as well. Those leaves are spent, they're not adding anything new to the plant. You can use them as brown material in your compost bin, chuck them in the green bin, or you can even use them as mulch if you chop them up. Deadheading is another way to prune your strappy plants. A lot of them are going to have that tall flower spike, so whether it's a dianella, it's a lomandra, an agapanthus, or a kangaroo paw, those flower spikes that are so brilliant and beautiful are going to die back eventually after they've finished flowering and they go to seed. If you don't want to provide any seed for the birds and you're worried about those seeds propagating into weeds, cut those flower stems off down at the base as close to the stem as you can without damaging any of the rest of the plant. This will encourage the plant to bloom even more. It'll get rid of that dead material. The plants will look better, and also they'll divert resources from producing seeds into other parts of the plant. So depending on the way that you want to prune your plants, if you're just removing leaves from the base, you can just use your hands. Maybe wear a pair of gloves, especially if it's a public garden or your plant is on the streetscape. The reason for this is that you'll find from time to time that there are actually hypodermic needles and stuff in those shrubs. Unfortunately, people do sometimes treat them as a bin. It's not nice, but I don't want you to get one of those hypodermic needles into your hand. Now, a glove isn't going to protect you from that 100%, but it will help. So still be careful and vigilant even if you are wearing gloves. If you're deadheading, I recommend a pair of snips or maybe even a pair of secateurs. If it's a really dry seed stalk, sometimes they just come out. It's dangerous though. I don't want to recommend that because you can actually damage the plant if you don't really know what you're doing and you're not comfortable. With time, you'll get a feel for the plant and when and where you can pull out different types of flower spikes without damaging that plant. But it's not something I'd recommend to everybody. If you want to dome it, I'm not going to stop you. It's up to you. You can do that. You can either use a hedge trimmer. It's probably not the best method because sometimes you can actually clip the leaf several times. So you're going to have like a clean cut at the end, and then there's going to be like little cuts along it, and you can sort of see the plant is fraying. Also, if your blades aren't sharp or perfectly flush together, so that they're really sliding together like that, if there's a bit of space between them, they're also going to shred that leaf. So you're going to have like little wavy parts of where the leaf is getting shredded, and then, you know, down the leaf veins, they're going to start to separate. It just creates a fuzzy look and it's not clean. Probably the best way to prune into a dome is using a pair of shears. Now, it's best to do that regularly. If you're trying to attack a fully grown plant that's never been pruned before into a dome, you're going to be fighting it. You can do it still, it's fine. Another thing to watch out for is that skirt at the bottom often gets left. Like, you'll see people prune it into a dome, then they put the hedger away or the shears away, and then they come and rake up all the leaves, and then there's all these leaves at the base that didn't get pruned, and they just get left because the gardener just says, oh well, close enough's good enough. Looks really silly. So come back around with a pair of secateurs at the end and just get rid of them. Now, you can leave those leaves on the ground as mulch. I don't think that looks very nice for me personally. I think you really do need to spend a bit of time and rake them up and make them look really, really nice. Just gives a better finish on the look. But if it's a permaculture garden, or if it's just your own home garden and you don't mind the look of that, by all means go ahead. It's not a crime against horticulture to leave leaves on the ground. As long as they're not preventing any of that airflow getting around the base of any nearby plants, it's fine. So if your plant is really, really overgrown, sometimes it is actually beneficial to give it a really hard cut right to the ground. Most strappy plants can handle this. They have really resilient rhizomes, and pruning them to the ground will just let them have a fresh start. It's not going to stop them from growing outwards though. So you need to understand that it's going to create a bunch of new stems or rhizomes that'll grow out with new leaves, and eventually it will get back to that same size. If you really want to get rid of that strappy plant, you can use some glyphosate or another kind of a herbicide, but it's probably not going to work unless you actually put it on a fresh cut on the rhizome. So as a maintenance gardener, I've personally used a lot of glyphosate in my time, and what I've found is that you can spray glyphosate pretty much to the mixture on the label onto something like a lomandra or a diete, and most of the time it's just going to kill the weeds that are inside of that plant. It's actually not going to kill the lomandra. So that's a neat little trick. It may slow it down a little bit, but do we really want our plants growing that quickly? That's something to juggle up. Not something I'd recommend to everybody, but it's just something to keep in mind, that glyphosate probably isn't going to kill your strappy plant unless you put it on a fresh cut. Remember, always read the label and follow instructions whenever you use any kind of chemical. So there are a bunch of different strappy plants that we recommend using. The first one I want to talk about is Lucky Stripe Lomandra. So this particular lomandra is one of the only ultra tough, no fuss, strappy leaf variegated plants for mass planting appeal. You can plant it from Cairns to Melbourne to Perth, and it has ultra clean foliage even in those humid climates. Blemishes and spots are usually really common on these variegated strappy leaf plants, but Lucky Stripe Lomandra is an exception, generally remaining spot free. It rarely, if ever, produces viable seed, so it's going to stay where it's planted, and you can plant it near waterways, in windy positions, and other places where you'd usually be really concerned about weed potentiality. Banana Split Diaetes. So this is another one that has clean variegated foliage. It also has white flowers with splashes of purple from October to January, and it's very tough, particularly in drought, heat, humidity, and frost. So it works Australia-wide. Breeze Dianella. Dianellas are generally known to have really tall, messy canes that fall, and they can look messy if you don't have the maintenance budget to prune those canes out, also known as deadheading. But Breeze Dianella is much tidier, and it doesn't have any above ground messy canes that, look untidy if they haven't been pruned. This can reduce your maintenance budget. It's very fast establishing and is about 40% larger than Little Jess Dianella. Bingo Blue Agapanthus. Now, Aussie gardeners tend to love or hate Aggies. I tend to be someone who loves them because their flowers are really spectacular and their lush green strappy leaves can bring tropical vibes even to cooler climates like Melbourne. Bingo Blue Agapanthus produces bright blue flowers for a longer period than other Aggies. They can be seen en masse from October to November and sporadically throughout the rest of the year as well. It's got great disease resistance and is tough, drought, frost tolerant. It's about 40 centimeters high by 60 centimeters wide, so not a massive agapanthus compared to some of the other varieties out there. So there you've got some advice from a professional horticulturist about pruning strappy plants. It's up to you now how you prune your strappy plants, and if you really want to keep pruning them into a dome, don't let me be the one to stop you. Gardening is a very personal thing, and I want you to have fun with it.